"It was just an accident," she said. "My little girl didn't know what she was doing." That was the first thing I read in the original police report from March 18th, 1960. A mother's voice steady, emotionless, trying to explain why her husband now lay dead in their bed with a bullet in his skull. The setting? A modest home in Independence, Missouri. Morning light slipping through the curtains, the usual neighborhood silence broken only by the sound of sirens. Police arrive. James Kinn, 25 years old, is found under the sheets, sprawled motionless. The revolver, his own, still on the nightstand. Sharon is standing nearby, holding her toddler, who's blinking in confusion, far too young to understand what's happening. But here's what froze me: Sharon's tone. The officers noted it too. No visible panic, no tears, no trembling hands. She wasn't screaming or wailing, she was composed, casual even. Almost like she was running down a grocery list, not reporting a death. She claimed her 2-year-old daughter had climbed into the bed, found the loaded pistol, and somehow managed to point it at the back of James's head and pull the trigger. A freak accident, a tragedy, case closed. Something about it didn't sit right with me, or with the detectives who stood in that room. Because this wasn't just a woman reacting to loss. This was a woman managing a story, and I had the uneasy sense that she'd been waiting for this moment, that maybe it hadn't been an accident at all. Her name was Sharon Elizabeth Kinn. Blonde, sharp-featured, striking. To anyone outside the house, she was the picture of mid-century domesticity, a wife, a mother, the kind of woman who kept up appearances with lipstick and polite smiles. She'd married James when she was only 17. They met in high school. She got pregnant and the wedding came fast. He was training to be a science teacher. She was smart, ambitious, and always had this edge to her. A magnetic confidence that people mistook for charm. But those close to her, they said she could turn cold in a heartbeat. By the age of 20, she had 2 children and a quiet home in Independence. Neighbors recalled the sound of fights late at night, raised voices, slamming doors. Sharon flirted openly with other men. She had a taste for new things: clothes, cars, attention. James wanted stability. Sharon wanted control. The week before James's death, he had reportedly been thinking about leaving her. There were rumors he planned to take custody of their children. There was even talk of him changing his life insurance policy. And then he ends up dead. One clean shot to the back of the head. Her story? That their toddler pulled the trigger by accident. That somehow this tiny child had the strength, the coordination, the awareness to do something like that. But detectives weren't nodding along. They were studying the scene, the height of the bullet wound, the trajectory, the way the gun had been placed on the nightstand. None of it lined up. It was too neat, too easy, too scripted. And the more I stared at the photos and read the transcripts, the more I realized this wasn't a grieving wife. This was someone who'd rehearsed her lines. Someone who knew the power of playing the victim and exactly how far she could push a lie before someone pushed back. When I got my hands on the original police report, I combed through it like I was looking for cracks in a mirror, and they were everywhere. The revolver, James's personal gun, had no fingerprints on it. None except for his, not the toddler's, not Sharon's. And that's strange, right? A 2-year-old picks up a loaded weapon, accidentally fires it, and somehow doesn't leave a single smudge. Then came the ballistics report. The bullet entered the back of James's head at a downward angle, but their daughter, she was barely tall enough to reach the mattress edge, let alone fire a precise shot at that trajectory. Experts later noted that the gun would have needed to be held steady at a particular height and with more strength than a toddler could possibly muster. And yet, no powder burns on the child, no gun oil on her hands. No trace that she ever touched the weapon at all. But the most unsettling part, Sharon never called 911. A neighbor eventually made the emergency call after hearing her calmly mention that James had been shot, like she was reporting a broken dish, not her husband's death. Still, the coroner listed the cause as accidental. No charges filed, no further questions. Sharon walked out of that house a free woman. But here's what I've learned. When death comes that easily, it tends to come again. It didn't take long. Barely 2 months had passed before tragedy found its way back into Sharon's orbit. Only this time, it didn't come with any illusions of innocence. The victim was Patricia Jones, a 23-year-old mother and Sunday school teacher, quiet, kind, married to Walter Jones, a man who just so happened to be having an affair with Sharon, and Patricia knew. She'd confronted Walter more than once. Rumors swirled that she even reached out to Sharon herself demanding she end things. That kind of confrontation. It put a target right on her back. On May 27th, Patricia was reported missing. She had left work and never made it home. 2 days later, her body was found in a grassy field on the outskirts of Kansas City, just miles from where Sharon lived. 4 bullet wounds, 2 in the chest, 1 in the side, 1 in the face. She'd been shot with a .22 caliber pistol, same kind of weapon Sharon was known to keep. Her body had been dumped, not buried. No attempt to hide it, almost like someone wanted her found. And suddenly, the police couldn't keep pretending this was bad luck. 2 deaths, 2 gunshots, both tied to Sharon Kin. This time, they weren't going to let her walk away so easily. I started tracing everything: old case files, grainy microfilm articles, yellowed notes scribbled in margins by journalists who'd followed the trial back in the day. And time after time, one thing kept showing up. Patricia Jones's murder was the moment things finally cracked open. The affair, the jealousy, the timing. Sharon had been the last known person to see Patricia alive. She'd even admitted to meeting her the day she vanished, but claimed they just talked before Patricia walked away unharmed. That was a lie, and everyone knew it. When Patricia's body was found riddled with bullets, Sharon was arrested almost immediately. Her mugshot, cold stare, no makeup, still defiant. But the ripples didn't stop there. James Kin's suspicious accidental death came surging back to the surface. What once seemed like a tragic fluke now looked like a rehearsal. Investigators reopened his case, hoping to connect the dots between these 2 deaths, hoping to expose what was becoming painfully obvious. This wasn't just a woman unlucky enough to be near 2 murders. This was someone at the center of a storm she had created herself. Finally, it felt like justice was catching up to her. But deep down, I had this sinking feeling, because nothing about this case was going to unfold cleanly, not with Sharon Kin. The trial began in mid-1961, and I've got to say, on paper, the prosecution had her pinned. Patricia Jones had been shot 4 times with a .22 caliber weapon. Sharon was known to carry one. The motive was clear: jealousy, control, the need to eliminate the woman standing in her way. The opportunity? Ironclad. Sharon had no alibi, and multiple witnesses placed her with Patricia on the day of the murder. Even the bullets recovered from Patricia's body were a match to ammo Sharon had purchased weeks earlier. You'd think it was a slam dunk, but Sharon didn't go down easy. Her defense team was slick, real silver-tongued operators who knew exactly how to spin a narrative. They painted her as a victim of her own appearance, a too pretty woman being punished by a jealous society, a housewife unfairly targeted because she didn't act the way a good widow should. They leaned hard into gender politics, into emotional manipulation, and whether you buy it or not, it worked. At first, anyway. She was convicted. The jury came back with a guilty verdict. But before she could be sentenced, the conviction was overturned. Technicalities, jury misconduct, a questionable instruction from the judge, legal gymnastics that unraveled everything. And just like that, Sharon was free again. But not for long. Second trial, hung jury. Despite all the evidence, despite Sharon's tangled lies and inconsistencies, the jury couldn't reach a unanimous decision. Some were swayed by her polished appearance, her composure. Others weren't sure the timeline nailed her down enough. And so, mistrial. She walked out of that courtroom once again. The third trial followed not long after. New jury, same evidence, same woman, but this time acquittal. Sharon Kin had now faced a courtroom 3 separate times for the murder of Patricia Jones and beat all of them. Each time she got a little sharper, a little bolder. The media had a field day, dubbing her the Tiger Lady. Headlines painted her as a seductive mastermind. People either admired her or feared her. And James Kin, his death was quietly pushed aside. After 3 failed murder trials, prosecutors didn't want to risk a 4th disaster. So the case that started it all, the suspicious, silent death of her husband, was never touched again. Buried under legal dust. That means Sharon Kin had now been tied to 2 bodies, 2 dead people, 2 bullet-riddled corpses, and not one conviction held. Then, like she knew her time was running out, she slipped out of Missouri. But she didn't vanish into the shadows. She went somewhere new, somewhere louder, more dangerous. She went south. By early 1964, Sharon had resurfaced in Mexico City, and this is where things took an even darker, stranger turn. The press, already obsessed with her back in the States, caught wind of her arrival and quickly dubbed her La Pistolera, the gunwoman, a name that stuck like the barrel of a smoking revolver pressed to a page. She dyed her hair, wore dark sunglasses, spoke broken Spanish, but she hadn't changed, not really. There she met a man named Francisco Perez Ordonez, a Mexican citizen with ties to local nightlife and some murky business dealings. Sharon charmed him, as she always did, but within weeks things turned volatile. On the night of September 18th, Francisco was found dead in a Mexico City hotel room, shot once close range. Sharon told the police he tried to assault her, that she had acted in self-defense. The same cold logic, the same calm delivery. But this wasn't Missouri, and Mexican authorities, they weren't buying her story. They took one look at the crime scene, at the neatness of the shot, at Sharon's lack of visible injury, and immediately arrested her. No hesitation, no delay. This time, the walls were closing in. For the first time in her chaotic trail of violence, Sharon Kin actually heard the word she'd dodged for years: guilty. Mexican prosecutors didn't waste time. The evidence was more straightforward than anything back in Missouri. Francisco Ordonez had been shot at close range. There were no signs of a struggle, no witnesses, just a calm, collected woman with a gun and a body in a hotel room. The jury didn't buy the self-defense claim. The judge didn't either. Sharon was convicted of murder and sentenced to 10 years in Ixtapalapa Women's Prison, a notoriously harsh facility on the outskirts of Mexico City. Crumbling walls, overcrowded cells, corrupt guards. It wasn't a place people escaped from or survived easily. For a moment, it looked like her reign had finally ended. Sharon Kin, the manipulator, the suburban widow turned killer, was finally off the streets. She was going to serve real time. No more hung juries, no more slick defense teams, no more courtroom tricks. But Sharon wasn't done yet, because 5 years into her sentence, she pulled off something that still doesn't make sense. It happened in December of 1969. A normal day inside the prison. Guards did their rounds, prisoners cleaned floors, routine, mundane, and then her cell was empty. No sign of a struggle, no broken locks, just gone. Sharon Kin had vanished. To this day, no one can say for certain how she escaped. Theories flew fast. Some said she bribed guards with cash funneled in from the US. Others believed a cartel smuggled her out in a laundry truck. There were whispers of high-level help officials paid off to turn a blind eye. But none of it was ever confirmed. There was no surveillance, no paper trail, just the eerie fact that a convicted murderer disappeared from one of the most secure women's prisons in Mexico and no one stopped her. It was like she walked through the walls. When the prison finally reported her missing, she was already long gone. Not a single confirmed sighting. No fingerprints, no leads, nothing. The woman who beat 3 trials, charmed her way through murder accusations, and manipulated everyone in her orbit had pulled off the ultimate vanishing act. And for over 50 years, the world would ask, where the hell did Sharon Kin go? I dove into everything US. Marshal fugitive bulletins, declassified FBI memos, dusty Interpol documents buried in digital archives. Sharon's name would flare up every few years, then vanish again like fog in a mirror. There were no verified sightings, no fingerprints, no credit card trails, just stories and whispers. A blonde woman spotted in a Colombian border town going by the name Maria. A retired waitress in Galveston, Texas, who fit Sharon's exact description but had airtight paperwork and a thick southern drawl. There was even talk that some of the prison guards at Ixtapalapa had been seen driving new cars shortly after her escape. Rumors spread like wildfire, but none could be proven. It was like she didn't just escape prison, she escaped existence. I kept circling back to the same thought. How does someone disappear that completely? No digital footprint, no hospital records, no death certificate, not even a mistake, a tax form, a phone call, a single slip up in over 50 years. She wasn't running. She was dissolving. And yet, her story never died. Sharon Kin became something else entirely, an urban legend among true crime obsessives. A case so twisted, so unresolved, it stopped feeling like history and started feeling like a ghost story. The woman who killed her husband, the woman who murdered her lover's wife, the woman who fled to another country, killed again, and then simply disappeared. She'd outmaneuvered police, prosecutors, prison guards, and multiple governments. To some, she was a master manipulator. To others, she was evil incarnate. But everyone agreed on one thing: she was gone. For good. Until she wasn't. Because in early 2024, something shifted. Quietly, suddenly, a sealed file moved up the chain. A new DNA match, an old fingerprint comparison. And just like that, the ghost had a pulse again. It started with a tip. Early in 2024, a retired investigator turned private researcher flagged something strange: a woman in her late 70s living in a small southerners town. No social security records before the early 1970s. No birth certificate. No school records. Her entire life before that, a black hole. To most, that would just be a dead end. But the FBI had been quietly reprocessing old fugitive files with modern tech. Sharon Kin's case, one of the longest-running fugitive investigations in US history, was still open. So they looked closer. Agents quietly observed the woman. She had Sharon's posture. Her voice had traces of a Midwestern lilt buried under a forced Southern twang. She always wore long sleeves, even in summer, and when they finally got access to something usable, an old glass, she threw out at a local diner. They ran DNA. They also found a fingerprint match from an old police mugshot. The scar on her forearm, same as one noted in Sharon's prison records. It wasn't just a resemblance anymore. Suddenly, the ghost had a face, a name, and it was one they hadn't spoken out loud in decades: Sharon Kin. She'd been living in plain sight under a fabricated identity, quietly tucked into a sleepy neighborhood where nobody asked questions. Her neighbors described her as kind, soft-spoken, the type who waved from her porch but never came to potlucks. She handed out candy at Halloween, took care of a few stray cats. Some even said she babysat occasionally. Good with kids, they told reporters. Of course she was. She always had been. That was Sharon's brilliance. She didn't just disappear. She rewrote herself. Same script, different town. Pretend to be helpful. Be charming but distant. Let people see just enough to think they know you. Keep the rest buried 6 feet deep. But this time, the story caught up to her. When the FBI finally knocked on her door, they didn't just bring a badge. They brought her past. And for the first time in 55 years, Sharon Kin had no place left to run. Now here's the part that really gets under my skin officially. The FBI hasn't confirmed her capture. No press release, no perp walk, no name on the wire. But behind the scenes, it's a different story. Sources close to the investigation say the fingerprint match is solid. The DNA results are conclusive. The physical scars, specifically the one on her left forearm and a faint burn mark on her shoulder, are identical to those documented in her 1964 arrest in Mexico. Agents are working with Mexican authorities, combing through extradition laws that haven't been enforced in over 5 decades. Some of the officials involved weren't even born when Sharon first went missing. It's that old. And if this woman really is Sharon Kin, this would go down as one of the longest fugitive recoveries in US history. 55 years, a murderer, a prison escapee, found alive, hiding. It doesn't just rewrite the ending of her story, it reopens the entire book. But here's what haunts me the most. How did she do it for that long? 55 years of silence. No leaks, no slips, no unguarded moments. Did she never confide in anyone? Never whisper it during a late-night conversation? Never break? Or was she so good at lying that she stopped knowing what the truth was? That's the most chilling possibility of all, that Sharon Kin didn't just fake a new life. She believed in it. Every handshake, every birthday party, every passing hello from a neighbor, all just lines in a script she never stopped performing. She wasn't living in fear. She was hiding in plain sight with the same smile, the same charm, and the same deadly instinct to stay one step ahead of everyone else. James Kin, Patricia Jones, Francisco Ordonez. That's 3 names. 3 people who crossed paths with Sharon Kin and didn't survive. 3 different killings, 2 countries, 1 woman. But how many more? That's the question I can't stop asking. What about the years in between those 5 decades of silence? The early years in Mexico, the reinvention in the US. Could someone like Sharon really stay quiet forever? What if there were other lovers, other arguments, other secrets buried deep beneath fake names and falsified records? We know what she's capable of. We've seen how easily she lies, how calmly she kills. It's not paranoia to wonder if there are more bodies. It's logic. Because how do you track the full body count of a ghost? You don't. And now, if the reports are true, if this woman really is Sharon Kin, then the ghost has returned. But here's the problem. When justice comes this late, what does it even look like? Can a 70-something-year-old fugitive be tried fairly for crimes committed half a century ago? Will witnesses still testify? Are the records still intact? Do prosecutors even have the tools to hold her accountable after so much time? Or has the clock run out? Sharon didn't just beat the legal system, she outlived it, outran the paper trail, outlasted the urgency. And that's what makes this moment so impossible to shake, because we're not just asking, where has she been? We're asking, does justice still exist when it's 55 years too late? And here's what haunts me the most. What else did she get away with? We'll never know the full story. We'll never see the entire puzzle. There are pages missing, records lost, memories faded, people gone. Was she really living peacefully in that quiet neighborhood, tending to her garden, waving at kids on bikes? Or was she still manipulating, still hiding, still dangerous? And if one woman could vanish for over half a century, slip through courts, prisons, borders, time itself, how many others are out there right now, smiling at their neighbors, hosting barbecues, living lives they built on blood and lies? Because Sharon Kin didn't just disappear. She showed us that monsters don't always hide in the dark. Sometimes they bake pies, pay their taxes, walk their dogs. And the scariest part, we never really know who they are until it's too late.